Morning comes early in Joseon. With the first rays of the rising sun, birds begin to sing, the roofs of houses turn pink, and all nature wakes up. People in Joseon wake up before dawn and start their day by stretching and bending left and right. From the rack in the plank and on the head, their whole body trembles from tension. They count the minutes until they can rest. Numerous servants brought a rich palanquin into the courtyard. The man sitting in the palanquin listened to the sounds made by the training people. I must admit, he is the early bird here. The man smiled to himself. The man stepped out of the palanquin. Servants met him at the gate leading to the estate. He walked around the yard, and in the windows of the houses he saw that all the inhabitants of the estate were engaged in physical exercise. The guards who stood guard near the beautiful gates were working out with very modern-looking dumbbells. It was strange to see such sports equipment in an ancient country. One of the elders noticed the man and, without interrupting his studies, greeted His Highness who had come to the morning training. The man was apparently very difficult. Work was already in full swing in the training room. Many people worked out with dumbbells and pumped up their biceps. Someone lifted weights while admiring the beautiful sunrise through the window. One of the men boasted to a friend that he had gained weight and his shoulders were now the size of mountains. The men struck different poses to show off their impressive figures. One of the officials, named Sejong, had been running on the treadmill for an hour and was on his last legs. The interesting design resembled the wheel in which hamsters run nowadays. There was a roar from the other end of the hall. The man was lifting the barbell, straining with all his strength. Who would have thought that this was the future Prince Wangmunjong? A group of men sat in a squat and planned to hold on until the end. His Highness shouted to them to continue standing like that, despite their fatigue. He was delighted. The roasting of muscle cells is in full swing. Could there be a greater joy for a sports lifestyle coach? Choi Young-jik, an ordinary Korean, studied nutritional science in graduate school in our time. He was a full-fledged health coach. He first learned about bodybuilding in the army. His service took place in extremely harsh conditions. His mother had a presentiment of this and cried bitterly as she saw off her son. The only outlet from the hard everyday life for Choi Young-jik was the gym. When he returned, his mother did not recognize him. Her son had become so pumped up. Even after returning to college, Choi Young-jik did not give up sports. Although he was in the history department and studied the history of ancient Joseon, he was more concerned with his body than with his studies. The girls looked at his athletic figure. Thanks to his training, Choi Young-jik received a Level 1 certification as a sports lifestyle instructor. He was qualified as a bodybuilder. He threw a party with friends to celebrate the occasion. Nothing unusual happened that evening, except that Choi Young-jik drank an extra glass of beer. Or 2. Or 3. But who was counting? And before going to bed, he decided to watch entertaining videos on his phone. He came across a historical video about why King Sejong's life was so short. It was already clear to Choi Young-jik. King Sejong in ancient Joseon certainly did not engage in sports. So he died prematurely. While falling asleep, Choi Young-jik thought that if he woke up in the morning in ancient Joseon, a line of soldiers with magnificent bodies flashed before his eyes. Yes, if he had gotten there, he would have rewritten the entire history of this state. Choi Young-jik was already passing out, and his last thought was that he had come up with a very funny idea. He woke up from the cry of a rooster, which was screaming at the top of its lungs. Someone asked a certain His Highness whether the cough was bothering him again. Choi Young-jik couldn't find his phone. And where does this crow sound come from? He sat up on the bed and grabbed his head. After all, yesterday he had too much to drink. Looking around, the guy decided that he was still sleeping. Otherwise, how can you explain that it is located in a traditional Korean house? Hanok? His consciousness cleared and the guy sat up with wide-eyed eyes. He was also dressed in national Korean clothes. The servant standing outside the door persistently reminded that it was time for His Highness to get up. But Choi Young-jik did not turn Winmania on the servant. He looked at his hands and screamed, not understanding why he had become such a skinny bastard. Where is his beautiful trained body? Where did it go? This can't be. In horror, he opened the window and the servant immediately asked if his cough was bothering him much. A medieval landscape appeared before Choi Young-jik's eyes. People in strange clothes bowed to him. Choi Young-jik stammered and asked what his name was. The servant decided that the prince had gone crazy, but replied that his first name was Yu and his second name was Suji. Choi Young-jik asked, "Is his dad's name Yudo?" The servant confirmed. This was King Sejong's name at birth. Choi Young-jik became desperate. He is the fourth king of Joseon, and after his death he was called Sejong the Great. If his father is Sejong the Great, then he turns out to be Li Yu, much better known as the Great Prince Suyang. This is how the history knowledge he acquired in college came in handy for Choi Young-jik. Figured out who he is now. It turns out he moved to the Joseon era. All the guy's feelings were very real. It wasn't a dream. Choi Young-ju went to the palace, where his arrival was reported to the king. He calculated that now the period is up to 1,445. As soon as he thought about what kind of people he would meet, his heart began to pound like crazy. The most respected Korean personality, #1 in the Korean army. Sejong himself is great. The king ordered the prince to enter, and Choi Young-jik's heart began to beat even faster. What a charismatic voice. What a breath. Stop. What is the king's breathing like? At this time, the father told his son that there was an order for him. Choi Young-jik stared at the fat, unhealthy-looking man on the throne. Who is this? Sejong didn't understand why the prince was staring at him like that. The guy hasn't woken up yet? And he, in turn, could not believe that this fat man was the great king. Choi Young-jik knelt down and began to say that his father showed incredible wisdom and insight in matters of governing the country. Choi Young-jik tried very hard to translate all the words from modern language into ancient language. The king's obedient son has lost all manners and appears ignorant, worrying about the proper way to kneel before the king. The father listened to his son. He appreciated his talents and often gave him instructions. Now we need to rewrite the chronicles for a certain period of the year. Choi Young-jin replied that he would obey the order and go to Chiphyunjong, an educational institution from the early Joseon era, and rewrite everything in capital letters. He got to work. The library employee said that if the great prince copied everything, eulogies would pour in from everywhere. Choi Young-jik had no problems not only with understanding speech, but also with writing. This body seems to have retained the muscle memory of its owner. He remembered his father's order to rewrite the chronicles in capital letters. The guy concluded that dad also has poor eyesight. He mentally formed a professional opinion of a coach with 15 years of experience about the great Sejong. Obesity, with a body mass index of more than 35. Choi Young-jik's face seemed too swollen. Besides, they met on a cool morning, and the king was already sweating down his cheeks. This is most likely diabetes or pre-diabetes. Then everything is clear as day. Sejong died suddenly. His successor, King Munjong, who had already been in mourning twice, became very weak and also died. Next, Tanjong, a little boy who was killed, ascends the throne. Choi Young-jik vowed that he would not let this happen. He began diligently to rewrite the book. Crown Prince Lee Hyan, Sejong's eldest son, the future King Munjong, entered the room and was surprised to see his brother here, who always preferred to enjoy hunting in the mountains. Choi Young-jik stood up and greeted his elder brother and future fifth king of Joseon. He said that he wanted to check the condition of the books that would be sent to his father. Let the brother do the king's bidding, and Lee Hyan will do his own thing. Choi Young-jik replied that many books are written in very small handwriting and are difficult to read. Lee Hyan looked at his brother and asked what he knew about his father's senile farsightedness. Choi Young-jik replied that he recently had such suspicions. Lee Hyam turned away and muttered that his father used to be so proud of his greatness. How changeable life is. It started a year ago, but at the moment it's a secret, so my brother needs to keep his mouth shut. Choi Young-jin bowed respectfully to his elder brother and mentally sent him away. Path doesn't think he got rid of him that easily. Choi Young-jik's head was aching from the strain of copying books. He began doing simple exercises to relieve tension in his neck and shoulders. As always, they worked great, and Choi Young-jik breathed a sigh of relief. The library visitors looked at him in surprise. What does the great prince do? If your neck hurts, you need to massage it. Why these strange movements? Choi Young-jik heard the puzzled whispers around him and realized that these people did not know what stretching was. Despite the fact that in this era there are already massage therapists, the effect of their therapy is insignificant. They have not yet studied anatomy, which is why the shape of the muscles and the methods of their connections are unknown to people. Choi Young-jik gave a standard answer. He recently sprained his neck while hunting, but moving his back he felt that he felt better. They can try it themselves. It helps. Together with several scientists, he performed 3 simple exercises. They diligently repeated after the prince everything he showed them. The result was so good that library patrons began to bloom like spring flowers. The next day, Crown Prince Lee Hyan entered the library and heard advice not to strain his neck and to move his back and shoulders so that he felt relaxed in his body. The prince widened his eyes. He was even more surprised by the exclamations that it was so good now that he didn't even need a doctor. The stretching technique demonstrated by the Great Prince Suyang quickly spread among Chip Hyun-jan's scholars. They called her the stretching whale. But Great Prince Suyang, as we will now call Choi Young-jik, had another headache. The city bazaar was in turmoil. Prince Suyang granted great women to the merchants. He came to buy sesame oil. There was no such oil. The merchant could offer beef fat. And there's even some horse fat. Suyang immediately bought a large amount of fat. The servant who carried Suyang's purchases did not understand the prince. He just bought all the medicinal herbs, and now he also bought the oil. Choi Young-jik remembered that Prince Suyang died of severe dermatitis. And since he cannot return to modern times, then proactive measures need to be taken. At this time, even simple dermatitis is fatal. He returned home happy, hoping that he could solve this problem. On the threshold, he was met by an unfamiliar woman who reproached him for going outside often. Suyang turned around and automatically greeted his wife. He said he had some experimental ideas. Here he fell silent. "Do you mean wife? Does he have a wife?" At this time, the wife reprimanded her husband that he used to spend whole days hunting, but now he took up despicable work. What is her husband even thinking about? While Choi Young-jik mentally panicked, Prince Suyang smiled and told his wife that when he was looking through books in the library, he came across an interesting invention that was used in the country of Song for washing. He thinks it would be nice to use it now. The most necessary thing for Prince Suyang was simple soap. Even in modern times, people suffer from skin diseases if they play sports in unwashed clothes. What would it be like to do bodybuilding in Joseon, where there is no trace of soap? Everywhere is full of germs. Of course, this will lead to the development of even more serious skin diseases. One day, Choi Young-jik tried to make soap for the hall where he worked. The grandmother of the owner of the premises said that she did not trust Magadan soap, so she made it herself. Choi Young-jik helped her. The recipe is surprisingly simple. You need to add water mixed with the ash of burnt rice straw to natural olive oil. Mix thoroughly and heat. This soap can be made even in Joseon. The prince's wife was surprised. If oil gets on your skin will become dirty. She would never have thought that oil could be used for washing. Suyang continued to say that he had read that this product could clean dirty collars and remove old stains. How amazing is this remedy? The woman pursed her lips, dryly wished her husband good luck and left, accompanied by a maid. Suyang began to realize that his relationship with his wife was strained. The next day, Suyang got to work and watched soap being boiled in a large cauldron. Finding the ideal ratio of ingredients was only possible through experimentation. What's boiling in the cauldron looks good, but how effective will it be? He decided to test the soap on himself. Of course, it was not perfect, but the result was quite good. Sitting in a wooden barrel of hot water, Suyang sniffed the soap. The smell was also pleasant. It will be possible to open industrial production. I wonder if it will be possible to establish supplies to the Ming dynasty. Another problem that worried the prince was the health of King Sejong. Even the king's father at one time gave up trying to force Sejong to take care of his body. How can the second son, even if he is not the heir to the throne, reach the king? Dad will decide that the guy has absolutely nothing to do, that he is filling his head with all sorts of nonsense, and will send him to war or into exile. This means that in order to cope with the king's obesity, he must be outsmarted. And Suyang's own body is a real problem. How can he teach someone like this? The prince got out of the bath and stretched his weak abdominal muscles. To teach someone, you first need to train regularly. Reach the bar of lifting weights of 400 kilograms and develop about 620 muscles. The servants watched in surprise as the prince suddenly jumped on the spot and began to take various funny poses. Suyang at this time decided to write a book on bodybuilding with theory and practice. After all, bringing to perfection the body donated by parents speaks of respect for them. In the morning, in the courtyard, Suyang began to exercise. He started with hand pull-ups, using a bar at the entrance to the house for this purpose. Then he performed flexions and extensions 29 times, holding onto tall rice pots. Did 82 push-ups from the floor, and he finished it off with a dragon bar. It looks like Suyang has a very gifted body. Core strength and traction were beyond the capabilities of the average person. Otherwise, how could he do all these exercises with such a belly? Is it really the genes of the first king of Joseon, Taejo Lee Sunhye, that are making themselves felt? When Suyang was washing his face after training, the blacksmiths came to him and brought him what he had been waiting for so long, the pieces of iron dear to his heart, dumbbells that were nice to look at. The prince was delighted and paid generously. The blacksmiths were very happy that they had done a job well, which had never been done before. The blacksmiths were sure that the prince had gone crazy, but they received the money, and then it was none of their business. However, they became worried whether the prince was going to create his own army. Just in case, they decided to go home and not tell anyone about it. Suyang was not satisfied with exercising with his body weight without iron. Finally, he was able to train as he wanted. One of the maids was outraged by the prince's ugly behavior. She is surprised that her mistress takes everything so calmly. Suyang's wife interrupted her and said that she didn't want to hear anything about her husband. The girl did not remain silent. Either the prince will smear himself with oil, or he will give a bunch of rice for some pieces of iron. Previously, he only hunted, ignoring his wife, and now he's busy with extremely strange things. What did the lady do so wrong in her past life? The prince's wife sharply told the girl to shut up. She remembered how, even before her marriage, she walked with Suyang in the garden with cherry blossoms. He gave her a beautiful flower and looked at her tenderly and lovingly. She sent the maid away and plunged into a barrel of hot water. Next to the barrel lay soap, which her husband gave her. The woman took a bar of soap and decided to try it on herself. She ran a bar of soap over her hand and screamed in amazement, "This can't happen." Refreshed, Suyang walked out of the bathroom. "Today I need to try to lift more weight in training." Outside the bathroom door, his wife was waiting for him, looking down modestly. She said she was pleasantly surprised by the soap, which could actually remove stubborn stains. Suyang was pleased that the woman also tried his invention. However, she continued that the soap had a rather strong smell of oil, and if she used it all the time, she would be mistaken for the wife of an oil merchant. Suyang thought about it. If you replace the butter with beef or pork fat, it will be too expensive. Therefore, in this situation, soap can become a luxury available only to the Joseon nobility. My wife said that the smell of the oil would be better if you add linden or camellia oil. Such a thought did not occur to Suyang, and he warmly thanked his wife for the brilliant idea. The poor coastal village was excited by the news. Prince Suyang himself came to them. The prince recognized one of the peasants, who had been the beater during last year's hunt. He was covered in wounds after luring a deer out of the forest. The prince does not forget those who have served him well, and thanks the man. Every 15 days he will send him 2 bottles of oil, 2 bags of rice, eggs, chicken, and much more. And in return, he will send the prince information about the weight and height of his children every 15 days. Within a couple of days, Suyang promised to provide food assistance to 20 households and began recording the height and weight of children. Some families had a diet based on protein, while others had a diet based on carbohydrates and fats. Next, he was going to record changes in the children's physique parameters as arguments for the father. When his father gets angry with him for meaningless requests about his health, he will show him a comparison of children, and the father will not be able to argue with him. This study will certainly help change King Sejong's eating habits. Suyang turned to the blacksmith again and showed him the drawing. The blacksmith could not read, but he understood the numbers. 1 round piece of iron weighing 30 kilograms. So this is the total weight of the 3 pot lids in the royal kitchen. Suyang really wanted to make a real barbell. The blacksmith did not quite understand why he was putting the caps on the iron rod. That's 4 on each side. This will be 240 kilograms. Is it such a burden for his prince? Suyang replied that this was not enough, and that even more weight would be needed in the future. It would be nice if the design reached 300 kilograms. The blacksmith was dumbfounded. Suyang had one more task. You need to roll the iron plate into a rod about 3 feet long. Having said this, he wondered if it was possible, given the technical capabilities of this era, to create firearms. Suyang thought that from the moment he entered the prince's body, the prince's image began to change greatly. Everyone has already noted his vigorous activity. He looked at his servant through the eyes of a trainer. The guy has a standard build, excellent shoulders and biceps, strong latissimus dorsi, strong brachioradialis muscles. The servant confirmed that he had always been told that he had heavy bones. Suyang knew that the guy was an illegitimate son and would never be able to become an official. But he is an ideal candidate for initial testing. He invited the guy to become his first student on the path to improving the body. If everything works out, he will have no equal in all of Joseon. The guy happily agreed. Suyang came to see the crown prince, his elder brother. Lee Hyan was very surprised to see his brother. He lost a good amount of weight. His upper body was clearly stronger, but the seriousness in his eyes did not increase. Lee Hyan asked why his brother wanted to see him. Suyang replied that his blooming appearance comes from a new method of hardening and giving up hunting. And he was looking for a meeting to show his brother one thing. He opened a carved box in which there was a bar of soap and invited Lee Hyan to try the new product. The crown prince washed his hands and was amazed at how clean and pleasant they felt. What a miracle cure. But it is probably very expensive if it uses camellia oil. Fortunately, Suyang's wife suggested a cheaper type of oil. The crown prince took the brush and immediately wrote a decree, which stated that he had managed to get rid of dirt with the help of soap created by the Grand Prince Suyang. And now all officials must wash their hands day and evening. Despite the fact that soap is not cheap, many people can buy it. But due to the fact that the product is new and people know nothing about it, they will not actively buy it yet. Therefore, Lee Hyun decided to force officials to use soap. This is the best way to show them the benefits of a new product. Suyang knew that in the modern world, this is called a free trial. Lee Hyun continued that if private trading of soap began, it would be easier to distribute it. Then it will be possible to introduce a tax and get a new source of income. Suyang marveled at his brother's wisdom. It is not for nothing that he is the first son of Sejong the Great and the future King Munjong. A high official came to the blacksmiths, who received the order from Suyang, and asked if they were sure that the prince ordered exactly this. They confirmed. The nobleman warned the blacksmiths that they would face a terrible punishment if this was not the case, and they made a mistake. One of the blacksmiths told his colleague that all the prince's orders should be melted down and destroyed. The damage may be colossal, but life is more valuable than money. The nobleman walked through the village, accompanied by the glances of passers-by. He thought that the second prince, who failed to earn the right of succession, spent a lot of money on the purchase of iron. He spends his days strengthening his body. Finally, Prince Suyang's true nature showed itself. The nobleman's face was distorted by an evil grin. A new product called soap has created a sensation in Joseon. I washed my hands with it, and the ink stains immediately disappeared. The oil on my face was also easily washed off. All the residents were sparkling with cleanliness and praised the soap. Some people thought that soap was invented by Crown Prince Lee Hyun and were very surprised when they heard that it was the invention of Prince Suyang. He was always considered an empty talker who could only have fun while hunting. Prince Suyang did not hear these conversations. He was busy lifting weights. The servant counted to 9 and looked at the prince in horror, who lifted the weight for the 10th time and exhaled. Bench pressing 120-kilogram weight 10 times is not bad. His muscles developed so quickly, as if the god of bodybuilding favored him. In order not to embarrass the people of this era, the prince insisted that hardening the body was the best way to show respect for parents. And mentally, I rejoiced at my excellent muscles. Although his equipment resembled rusty weights in a bad fitness center, he had a lot of use for it, although there were many difficulties with production. The blacksmiths apologized that they did not have time to finish the prince's order and were ready to return all the money. They not only didn't have time, but also still haven't mastered the design. But more on that later. Now it's Puck's servant's turn to show what he's capable of. Puck refused. He was not going to die so early, and with such burdens he would immediately go to his forefathers. The prince, with a sweet smile that seemed devilish to Puck, said that he warned the servant that the body constantly needs to be hardened. He put the screaming Puck down and thrust the barbell into his hands. During the bench press, you need to use not only your upper body but also your lower body. Puck strained himself and lifted the weight once. The prince's wife watched all this. Together with the dumbfounded maid, the wife could not recover from the sight of how handsome her husband had become. He was slim before, but now his body seems to radiate strength. He can now be compared to General Wan Bon. Suyang was very pleased with this comparison. The general was a true brave man from a young age. It would be necessary to introduce training for soldiers. One weapon is not enough to win. The half-strangled Puck hissed that he was going to die. Suddenly the gates of the house shook from powerful blows. Who dares to barge in on Prince Suyang so unceremoniously? The gates could not withstand the blows. They swung open and soldiers burst into the yard. They were commanded by a nobleman we knew with a gloomy face. The prince's wife blocked their way and said that they had broken into the domain of Prince Suyang. The leader pushed the woman away and ordered her to retire to her chambers. And then the scoundrel was thrown to the ground by a powerful blow from the prince. He was surprised that the prince could push him away so easily, and Suyang shouted in anger that no one has the right to open their dirty mouth to his wife. The soldiers grabbed their swords, demonstrating the seriousness of their intentions. Suyang recognized Captain Lee Suk, who reminded the prince that they had met at last year's hunting competition. The prince warned the captain that if he touched any of the prince's men, they would resist. The captain yelled that the prince had probably forgotten about his sins, that he was speaking to him so impudently. The iron object Suyang is holding is made from 24 swords. There are 20 such rods in total. Let the prince explain why he needs 400 weapons. He pushed forward the tied and beaten peasant, who was being supported by Suyang. Until recently, the prince was not interested in anyone, but now he began to help the poor. Wants to stir them up to revolt? Suyang replied that these were just speculations, without evidence. The captain dared to bring the military to his house based on groundless suspicions. This is an abuse of power. The captain didn't need proof. Everything is as clear as day. Word goes everywhere, and in the end, the secret becomes clear. Captain Lee Suk was happy that he was able to uncover the conspiracy. Suyang claimed that Lee Suk was wrong this time. He in turn said that everything was true, and now they will interrogate everyone who was close to the prince, using the harshest methods. Suyang understood that he and his loved ones faced detention and interrogation. Even if he declares his innocence, they will not calm down. This is a typical targeted investigation. But he didn't do anything wrong after moving into the prince's body. There must have been friction between the prince and Captain Lee Suk, but he knew nothing about it. Suyang was wondering what to do now. Suddenly another visitor came through the gate and asked what was going on here. Suyang was very excited to see his brother. He came very on time. As for Lee Suk, he did not expect to see the crown prince here. Lee Hyan explained that he heard a bad rumor about his brother that had spread everywhere and came to him in person. Lee Suk tried to warn the crown prince not to approach a madman who might organize an assassination attempt. Lee Hain darkened his face and replied that the captain should be more careful with his words when talking about the crown prince's younger brother. He intends to give Suyang a chance to explain himself. It will not be easy to cleanse yourself of dirty rumors. Strong arguments will be required. But if the accusations against his brother turn out to be groundless, Lee Suk smirked. Everything will be proven, don't let the crown prince worry. Lee Hae-young continued that if the accusations are not true, then Lee Suk-chi will not get off easy. Suyang stepped forward and said that he could explain everything. He sent Puck to bring him a book he was writing. He had a reason to create all the equipment, development of teachings about a healthy lifestyle, and he handed the book to his brother, who wondered what could be so important in a book about a healthy body. The first lines were logical and understandable. Respect for one's parents is expressed in caring for the body they gave. But Lee Hain did not understand why there was so much expense in something that is understandable in itself. Is it really that expensive to get healthy? Suyang leaned towards his elder brother. What he says now only he can hear. Sadly, their father is getting weaker day by day and getting fatter at the same rate. Lee Hain had not heard of any particular health problems with his father. Maybe the younger one has some new information? Or did he gain some knowledge in medicine? Suyang replied that he suspected his father had diabetes. Lee Hain was dumbfounded in surprise. Suyang thought that this was due to an overabundance of yang energy and because His Majesty was eating too much. And since he does not engage in physical activity, yang energy cannot be released. Therefore, part of it manifested itself through eye disease. Helping the poor and giving them food in exchange for recording the children's growth is also associated with the father. So Suyang was able to confirm that weight gain could be due to a few extra spoons of rice. His book contains all the facts related to nutrition and exercise. He wants to convince his father to take care of his health. After listening to all this, the crown prince sharply shouted to the captain to recall all the soldiers. Prince Suyang has no bad intentions, but the captain was as steadfast as a rock. They monitor the behavior and morals of all citizens, conduct investigations, and bring to justice anyone who takes a bad path. His Majesty will not be happy that their rights are challenged and prevented from fulfilling their duty. Now inspectors of different ranks have gathered here. Among them is a young official who recently passed the state exam, and the crown prince wants Lee Suk-cha to simply bow to his command without knowing all the facts? He is the head of the moral inspection. What example will he set for his subordinates? If the princes want to drive them out of here, they will resist. The captain drew his sword. The crown prince cannot cover for someone just because he is his relative. This is not how a future king should behave. Lee Hain looked at the captain silently, who went into a rage and shouted for the crown prince to be firm and show the world the greatness of the laws of his country. Lee Suk-chi rose to the position of chief inspector for a reason. Now this problem was not just about him and Prince Suyang. He brought the crown prince into this too. Then Suyang decided to personally show the crown prince why he needed all this expensive equipment. He will prove everything with his strength. His Majesty is no longer living an unhealthy lifestyle and does not want to change it. But if you show him unprecedented power, he may become interested. If Suyang can convince this idiot captain, then he can convince His Majesty too. Lee Hain shouted that Prince Suyang was developing healing methods for his people, and these devices were created just for this. Seok-chi did not believe this explanation. Why did the prince buy iron? It dawned on Lee Hain that the purchase of iron was the reason for this inspection. The captain said that he would personally check these devices, which caused surprise among his subordinates. One of the soldiers knew that he had no equal in strength. He would look at what kind of equipment it was, and if it was nothing, it would be obvious to everyone that Suyang was lying. Let the captain be the judge in this dispute. He changed his clothes and went out to the weights. The soldier's biceps were impressive. Puck was the prince's assistant, and the youngest inspector volunteered to help the soldier. They took their places at the barbells. Suyang explained that this exercise is called a bench press, and he showed me how to hold the barbell correctly. With this exercise, the part of the arm from the hand to the elbow, the chest area and shoulders are strengthened. The soldier was sure that it was simply a matter of strength, and with force he tore the barbell from its holders. His face twisted. It turned out to be harder than he thought, but now he must defend the honor of the chief inspector. With great effort, the soldier lifted the bar again and lowered it. His assistant was pleasantly surprised by the strength of his comrade. No one can be stronger than him. He looked at the prince, and his face fell. Suyang lifted the barbell with tension. Sweat rolled down his face. Lee Hain looked at this competition without a word. Everyone listened as the prince lifted the barbell, and Puck counted out. 8, 9. Prince Suyang showed an incredible performance. Puck beamed with happiness. His opponent could not believe that he had lost while defending the honor of his superior, and Suyang edifyingly said that nutrition and the amount of training depend on the goal. Sticking to his own, he can lift 175 kilograms at a time. The soldiers listening to him had a mental seizure. This can't be true. A dissatisfied captain, Lee Seok-chi, recalled his soldiers. Today they are leaving, but Suyang is still under suspicion. The inspector will continue to do his duty. It was clear to Suyang and his loved ones that the captain would continue to watch him. Suyang replied that he would do the same and would closely monitor the captain. The crisis passed, and the elder brother learned about the illness of Sejong the Great. Lee Hain said that he would help Suyang complete his book. Therefore, we can say that along with the problem, the prince also found a good opportunity. But in fact, Prince Suyang's family almost got into big trouble. He asked his wife for forgiveness and promised to be more careful and discuss everything with her in advance. Suyang was about to leave, but his leg suddenly twisted and he fell on his wife, who caught him. It was very obscene, and the servants hastened to turn away. The wife blushed. For such things you need to retire to your chambers. Suyang was horrified. It was not the same at all. He was misunderstood. The evil captain, at the head of his soldiers, walked down the street. The soldier asked for forgiveness for letting his superior down. Seok-chi did not attach any importance to this. Among the metal items in Suyang's courtyard, he saw a thin, hollow iron rod that reminded him of an ancient tubular weapon. What if the prince is trying to improve an existing firearm? At a hunting competition a year ago, the inspector saw the appearance of an animal that bared its fangs. What Prince Suyang might be like. And this same prince suddenly started talking about respect for parents and improving the health of the body? What nonsense. Lee Seok-chi will reveal all his plans. 3 months after the events described, the wife told Suyang that she was pregnant. On that memorable day, they conceived a child. Suyang was terrified. He remembered his past life and the fat guys who, over a glass of beer, told him that their child was 3 years old and they had no time for sports. The prince himself at that time had 2 wives, a barbell and a dumbbell. He loved them more than anything in the world. Is this same man about to become a father? Suyang did not understand what world he was in and stood confused in front of his wife. Then his face cleared. He hugged his wife around the waist and lifted her into the air. We must convey this news to His Majesty as soon as possible. But first of all, he decided to take care of his wife's health and took her to the sports equipment. You need to take care of your health, and for this, you need to determine her level of physical fitness. He started stretching with her. But this was not enough for the birth to be successful. The princess died immediately after giving birth due to complications and lack of antiseptics. In this era, such deaths are a harsh everyday occurrence. Suyang decided to create at least a simple disinfectant. He built a distillation apparatus to distill alcohol from weak soju vodka. Using a thin tube, the alcohol vapor was cooled and dripped into the container. The prince ordered to bring all the soju that was in the house. After distillation, the prince had to check the purity of the alcohol. In front of him stood 2 mugs with the same volume of liquid. Water filled only 80% of the mug. The specific gravity of alcohol is about 0.8%. If the alcohol filtered by the prince is lighter or heavier than water, it is a failure. Suyang placed 2 mugs on the scales, which began to sway, and they froze in balance. Prince Suyang and his assistant created a disinfectant. Very little time has passed since Choi Young-jik moved to Joseon, and the return to modern times did not happen. He continued to practice exercises with his students. I did some simple physical exercise with my wife and servants, and although he sometimes wondered what happened in his world, these questions faded into the background. And after the birth of his child, Choi Young-jik finally plunged into the life of Joseon. Time flew by very quickly. The king appreciated the prince's success and praised him very much at the audience. Soap is now available to the common people and has enriched the treasury. In addition, he came up with a remedy that helps heal wounds. Suyang thanked His Majesty for his mercy, but admitted that he still had something to strive for. The father asked his son not to be modest. He will give the prince 200,000 nyans of silver to offset the cost of creating the soap. The recent birth of the firstborn Prince Suyang is a blessing for the royal family. And his wife, Mrs. Yun, came to her senses within a week after giving birth. This is proof of the effectiveness of the prince's new invention. The king decreed that alcohol be universally used during childbirth and treatment. The father looked at his son with emotion. He considered him the black sheep in their family, and he suddenly grew up so much. Suddenly everything in Sejong's eyes blurred, and he saw that the prince was shouting something with excitement. In March 1438, the condition of King Sejong the Great began to rapidly deteriorate. He lost consciousness and did not hear the alarmed courtiers calling for the doctor. Li Hain said with concern that he was very worried about his father's health. Although this time he quickly came to his senses, his sons were very worried. The king was constantly tormented by thirst, and his vision deteriorated even more. He takes a healing decoction, but it does not provide any benefit. Suyang listened to his brother gloomily. They sat at the table and had dinner together. Prince Suyang asked the crown prince if his father had discussed his well-being with him and complained about the whitish fog or insects flying around. Choi Young-jik's grandfather, who suffered from diabetes, complained about this in a past life. Li Hain did not recall such symptoms. Sejong simply cannot see what is in the distance. Suyang hoped that the situation was not as critical as he had expected. Perhaps this is just an ailment caused by overwork, although retinal degradation and cataracts cannot be treated at this time. According to history, a year later Sejong lost his sight. September and mother's birthday are coming soon. It's impossible to think of a better reason to influence my father. Suyang thought deeply. The crown prince assumed that his brother was planning to arrange something at the royal feast. In Suyang's book, there were only 3 exercises that use the heaviest weight: squats, bench press, and deadlift. Collectively, these are called the 3 basic exercises. For mother's birthday, Suyang decided to reach the 1,000-pound mark in these exercises. Li Hain decided that he had misheard. Is his brother serious? The crown prince once asked the strongest and most experienced soldier to lift 600 pounds, about 125 kilograms, and he failed. The soldier under the leadership of the commander was sweating and puffing, and it seemed to Li Hain that he was even scolding him through gritted teeth. Suyang, gnawing on a chicken leg, complained that he could not cope with the weight of 900 pounds. But if we talk about 1,000, it is a very difficult task. But for the sake of his father, he will do everything possible and impossible to take such weight. Li Hain decided not to stand aside either. There are many passages in his brother's book that are difficult to understand, so he will work on making the text accessible so that the meaning can reach even their stubborn father. But the prince also needs to improve his studies. Suyang choked. Should he study? He is already an adult and does not want to study again. Li Hain reminded his brother that the book must contain at least 13 sutras, the basic Confucian precepts of the Ming dynasty. Shouldn't the author of the book study them thoroughly? The only scriptures in Suyang's memory were the 4 books and the 5 classics. Is it that the difficulty level of the task has increased? He didn't want to study, but the guy remembered that this was all for the sake of the health of the great Sejong, and agreed. The brothers decided that Suyang would train and study, and Li Hain would do everything to introduce his father to the book. The brothers drank to their dad's health. It's time to do something crazy. In 6 months, raise the bar by 100 pounds. Suyang doubted whether he could handle such a task. It is impossible to convince the king of the effectiveness of the 3 exercises if the body is covered with fat. The prince pinched his side thoughtfully. To demonstrate the best side of his method, he needed to lose about 8 more pounds. The prince took Puck with him, and they set out into the countryside. The most effective way to lose weight in this era is to climb mountains. And not just walking, but running. Suyang had great confidence in his body's potential, and ran with all his might. After such a run, I didn't feel like studying at all. The prince was sitting behind a book, but did not even have the strength to look at the pages. So much text. Does he really have to learn all this? But he made a promise to his brother. Suyang sighed and got to work. At breakfast, Suyang's wife asked in horror how he would eat what was served to him. The menu included Chinese cabbage, cucumber, red tofu, and oats. Suyang sadly replied that at his mother's birthday, he must clearly show respect to his parents, and a fat body will not help him with this. And for the sake of this goal, he will eat like this every day. Mrs. Yoon apologized for not understanding her husband's plan and admitted that she ordered the food to be salted so that it could be eaten somehow. But it seems to her that she was stupid. She ordered the servants to remove all the food and set the table again. Mrs. Yoon watched with emotion as her precious husband lifted weights in the yard, and Puck watched in horror as his master climbed the sheer cliff. In the evenings, Suyang studied hard. During these activities, time flew by unnoticed. The day of the royal feast to celebrate Queen So-hong's birthday finally arrived. Numerous guests came to the palace. Various talented artists performed before the royal couple. The queen was delighted with such numbers. She applauded and laughed. Her husband was also very pleased, but he was upset that before his eyes there was only a blurry picture. The crown prince was talking to his brother on the street. His performance was his last. Everyone believes that he will perform like traveling actors. In the morning, Lee Hyatt told the crown princess that Suyang would lift 300 kilograms, but she didn't believe it and got angry. Let the brother try, then mother will believe in the teaching about a healthy lifestyle. Crown Prince Lee Hain had high hopes for his brother, but was very worried about how everything would go. Grand Prince Suyang came out to greet his father and mother, wearing a cloak that covered him from head to toe. He congratulated his mother on her birthday with all her heart. Everything he has, he received from his parents. A line of servants lined up next to the prince, each of whom held an iron circle in his hands. The servants were exhausted under such a weight and were waiting for His Highness to stop chattering and get down to business. Suyang continued that he wanted to draw the attention of his parents to his work on a healthy lifestyle, which contains methods for improving the body. The father could not understand what his son was getting at. There's a bunch of metal behind him. What is he trying to show? Suyang prepared a performance to repay his parents for their mercy. Today he has the opportunity to show them his magnificent body. With these words, Suyang threw off his cloak and stood up. The spectators gasped in amazement. On the birthday of Queen Seon-ho in 1438, the history of Joseon changed fundamentally. The audience didn't understand. Was it really Prince Suyang in front of them? Suyang began to demonstrate his capabilities and grabbed the barbell. The first exercise is the bench press. He easily took the weight of the barbell and lifted it. Everyone shouted that this couldn't happen. How can a person become so strong? The queen clapped her hands, although she did not quite understand what she had just seen. How much does this iron weigh? The bar weighs 40 kilograms, and the plates weigh 240. Altogether, 280. The royal couple were speechless with surprise. Mom was afraid that her boy had overstrained himself. Then Suyang began to demonstrate a squat. He explained that you need to squat and stand up with a barbell. This exercise can strengthen your lower body, including your waist and buttocks. The queen was horrified. This is very dangerous. The boy will overwork and get sick. But the boy did not listen to his mother. He will squat and lift 340 kilograms. With a huge weight, Suyang squatted down. The spectators were dejectedly silent. Huge muscles bulged in the prince's arms. Gathering all his strength, Suyang stood up with a weight of 340 kilograms. Mom and Dad were close to fainting. Mom held her heart. King Sejong turned to his advisor and asked how this was possible. He replied that he did not know, but thought that it was connected with the book that the second prince wrote. At this time, Suyang was about to demonstrate the last exercise, the deadlift. He stood in a low stance. He will use the heaviest implements for this exercise. The servants could hardly carry them in their hands. Lee Hain took care of his brother's back and handed him a strong leather belt. The servant untied the prince's cloth belt and put on him the one his brother had sent. The belt fit like a glove. It couldn't have been better. Some of the spectators decided that Prince Suyang had gone completely crazy due to his daily training. But Suyang approached the weight of 400 kilograms. The belt made Suyang's task much easier, but even it did not make his plan any less absurd. To achieve lifting such weight in such a short time is impossible. But there was no choice anymore. The veins in the prince's arms bulged from tension. All the spectators let out a loud cry of surprise. The prince lifted the barbell. Can one person really lift such a monstrous weight? Prince Suyang stood with weight, and it didn't seem to cost him any effort. But few people saw that blood was flowing down his clenched palms. The king sat with his eyes wide open, and the queen was close to fainting. The prince held everything for some time and threw the barbell to the ground. Its weight cracked the slabs that paved the yard. The queen jumped up from her seat and ran to her son. Suyang raised his head and looked at his parents' reaction. He really wanted to believe that he had achieved his goal. Korleva grabbed her son's hands and looked at his palms. During training with iron, the prince's hands became covered with bloody calluses. Is this called respect for parents? When she watches him work hard, she can't help but cry. Together with the queen, the prince's wife and maids began to cry. Sejong the Great looked at what was happening in front of him and listened to the conversations of the servants, who heard that those who practice martial arts have more defined abdominal muscles, but no one could bring them to such relief. The king admitted that his son had proven the effectiveness of the method outlined in his book. Son did a great job. But Dad has a question. What inspired the boy to develop this idea? Suyang stubbornly continued to talk about fasting to his parents and improving the body they gave him. The king asked whether the weight that the prince lifted was obligatory for everyone. People who do not have such power will not be able to adopt this method. Suyang cheerfully reported that no way. Strength increases naturally, and at first he wanted to get rid of excess weight. After a few months, the movements became smoother, and the fatigue disappeared. As proof, he clenched his powerful fist. Sejong thought, and said that he himself would familiarize himself with the book his sons were working on, and then determine what was right there and what was wrong. He will discuss all these details with the princes in the near future. Suyang listened to this speech very carefully, and at his father's last words, he blossomed with joy and exclaimed that the king's mercy was limitless. The father once again praised his son for his smart thoughts and ability to achieve success. The king read the book and found it extraordinary. He summoned the crown prince and asked if he knew where Suyang acquired such knowledge. Lee Hain didn't know this either. He only helped to clearly explain the method of training his younger brother. The king began to study with interest the results of changes in the body and eating habits of poor children. If you cook 1 bag of rice, about 6 kilograms, it will be enough to keep adults fed for 10 days and children for 20. However, overeating leads to aging of the body, fatigue, and illness. If children have 1 spoon of sesame oil in their diet daily, their body will be full of energy. On the other hand, about 300 grams of fat will be added in a month. Sejong the Great stopped reading and looked doubtfully at his huge belly. Excess fat, you say? A few days later, the crown prince came to his younger brother. Suyang asked eagerly, has his father read their book? Lee Hain sighed sadly, and Suyang fell into despair. But the crown prince laughed. His father expressed a desire to begin to comprehend this teaching personally. Suyang Yen believed his ears. Is this really true? Preparations were already in full swing in his yard. Today will be Dad's first day of training, so the training will be very short. Lee Hain cooled his brother's impulse. Right now the king is busy. He suggested that we discuss everything later. Suyang exclaimed that during this time, the king's vision would deteriorate so much that he would simply lose it. Suyang knew that the hardest thing in sports was getting to the gym. Sejong won't come by himself, so Suyang decided to go to him, grabbing a pair of dumbbells and holding a book between his teeth. The guards could not expel the persistent great prince from the royal court. They tried to get him up and throw him out, because the king would soon return from his walk, and there was such a mess going on here. But they were unable to move Suyang. The prince resisted with all his might. In the midst of the brawl, Dad returned from a walk and looked at this scene in surprise. He was angry, but Suyang did not pay attention to his father's anger. He needed to discuss something with him. Dad needs to play sports from today and do it consistently, without breaks. The crown prince, standing behind, completely agreed with his brother. The confrontation between father and sons was in full swing. The brothers insisted on immediate training. Dad desperately referred to being busy. A sudden realization dawned on him. These scoundrels suspect that he is sick, which is why the younger one wrote this book. Suyang stubbornly noted that the symptoms of his father's illness were visible to the naked eye. Sejong, in a rage, turned to the doctor, who after fainting accompanied him everywhere. What symptoms is the little one talking about? Dad is completely healthy. The doctor reminded the king of his sweating and thirst. Suyang understood that the king had read the book and looked at the tables. Therefore, I became concerned about my health. but completely rejected physical activity. Then the great prince dealt the Pope the decisive blow. He shouted loudly that most likely his father had diabetes. Sejong the Great was shocked by his son's statement. What is he carrying? Suyang continued that diabetes is a disease caused by an excess of yang energy, which destroys the body. Sweets serve as a lever to trigger the disease, and Dad eats sweets like crazy. Lee Hain, standing nearby, signaled to his brother to express himself more softly. Suyang continued that sweating thirst. Drowsiness, the king has all these signs. Sejong thoughtfully asked how long it would take to cure him if his son was telling the truth. Suyang replied that lasting improvement could be achieved in 6 months. Sejong sighed. He agrees, but if nothing changes in 6 months, the prince will be severely punished for deceiving the king. In the courtyard of Prince Suyang's estate, the king rode his horse in a circle. Mentally, he cursed both himself and his coach. It was uncomfortable for him to sit. He was bent over and seemed about to fall off his horse. In a commanding tone, the prince yelled at Dad that if he leaned in like that, he wouldn't succeed. Straighten up immediately to avoid injuring your back. Sejong didn't understand where his boy got that tone from. You just have to relax a little. You immediately get a reprimand. He was already tired and did not know how much longer he could endure this torture. Suyang decided that an hour on a horse was enough. Dad sighed with relief, finally hearing something smart from the little guy, but the son said that it was just a warm-up. The king decided that it was not in vain that he strangled the bastard in childhood. Now he was lifting an iron rod without circles, but this was also difficult for him. The ungrateful son blathered under his arm that inhale when ascending, exhale when descending. It is enough to do the exercise 24 times. Pay attention to the position of your legs. Do not tilt your upper body forward. Blah, blah, blah. The servant announced that it was time for the royal meal. The delighted Sejong demanded to carry everything he had. He walked up to the table and was dumbfounded. What is this? An optical illusion, or are they mocking him? 5 pathetic plates. It was a pity to look at the great Sejong. He sat so sadly at the table. The rice actually tasted like horse food. Sejong's patience has come to an end. He asked for a cook. Quickly clean everything up and serve normal food. The cook looked down. From behind the door came the voice of Suyanai, who anxiously asked, "What didn't Dad like?" Dad jumped in surprise. Is this scoundrel going to haunt him at lunch? Suyang bowed respectfully. This food was prepared specially at his request. The son cooked the perfect meal for Dad. This way my father will definitely not get fat. Sprouted brown rice fills you up for a long time, and tofu is an excellent meat substitute. The king was driven to despair. He literally spat fire. The main thing in food is taste, but here it's just hay. Suyang raised his voice. The king himself agreed to follow his recommendations for 6 months. If nothing works out, then Suyang is ready to go into lifelong exile along with his family members. But the father cannot do such a small thing as change his diet. The king gloomily took up his chopsticks and began to stuff this food into his mouth, wondering who his youngest had become. There seemed to be no such crazy people in the family. In the evening, Sejong the Great wrote a royal decree, but his hand was trembling and he could not write without making mistakes. He has been improving his body for 2 weeks now, and what is the result? The king's stomach growled with hunger. He demanded that they bring him something to eat. There was a knock on the door and that damn Suyang appeared on the threshold again. Dad jumped in surprise, and I woke up. This scoundrel even comes to him in his dreams. The king tossed and turned in bed. Because of this training, he is unable to engage in government affairs, if only he hadn't made a promise. But who could have imagined that everything would turn out this way? The guards at His Majesty's chambers were surprised that the king slept so quietly. He used to snore so hard the walls shook. Just 2 weeks ago, he was having difficulty breathing and tossing and turning endlessly. The king slept peacefully, but now he had completely different dreams. He felt triumphant after cultivating his body. Sejong the Great has been following a healthy lifestyle for 1 month. Suyang came to the royal inventor, Chang Yong-sil, and he listened in amazement as he talked to a wooden doll. The inventor greeted the prince and apologized for seeing him in such an unassuming manner. Jang Yong-sil came from a poor class, but rose through the ranks thanks to his talents. As a royal engineer, he made great contributions to the development of Joseon. In our time, he was known as a great scientist, but he was very different from Suyang's ideas about him. Suyang asked the inventor to make something. He had a drawing with him. He handed it to the scientist and added that this was the will of His Royal Majesty. At these words, the scientist's face changed, and he screamed at the top of his lungs. Suyang was taken aback by such a reaction. Truly, all geniuses are crazy. He didn't even state the main idea. Has Mr. Jang Yong-sil heard about his book? The scientist not only heard, but also saw the prince's speech. Then it all seemed truly incredible to him. Suyang explained what he wanted. His Majesty works with him every day, but it has become impossible to study outside due to the cold weather. We need to create a device that simulates walking on the street. Chang Yong-sil looked at the drawing and thought about it. He had never done this before. It will probably take several years to develop such a device. Suyang realized that there was little opportunity to build a modern treadmill in Joseon. He didn't have that much time left. He had to find another way. In addition, the king is not yet in a condition to train on a treadmill. This can cause him great pain. Suyang imagined his dad falling exhausted and feeling uncomfortable. The scientist asked in surprise, "Isn't this device designed to strengthen spirit?" Suyang replied that increasing the skill level leads to increasing the weight lifted. He himself often experienced excruciating pain in his arms and legs. The scientist thought and beamed. "No, we need to create such a device as the prince spoke about as soon as possible." Suyang was surprised how quickly Chang Yong-sol's opinion about the timing changed, and he was already discussing which frame was better to make. It would quickly break from beams, and the iron one would be too heavy. This is how he changed the shape of the drawing that Suyang brought him. Running wheel. Suyang scratched his head. Indeed, an interesting solution. The scientist was confident that he could cope with such work in 10 days. Of course, you will have to work hard, but this is the will of the king. Suyang imagined his father's furious face when he learned that the damn thing would be made so soon. 10 days later, Suyang showed his brother what he and Jang Yong-seol had done. Now it was possible to train both in winter and summer. Lee Hain was only worried that this device had not been tested by anyone, and the father would be the first. He was wrong. His brother happily checked out the treadmill and felt the joy of a forgotten experience. Lee Hain was still worried that Dad, who had just recently started training, would die on this device. We need to take someone who is not athletic. Suyang had a suitable candidate. The crown prince laughed nervously. Does his brother mean it? Let him not count. He can't stand physical exercise. Lee Hain himself didn't understand how he ended up on a treadmill and had been running along it non-stop for an hour. His sadistic brother reassured the crown prince that he had only been running for 15 minutes. Further, more. Lee Hain discovered that he was already doing a bench press, and his brother was not paying attention to his heart-rending screams. Prince Suyang was very sad to see his brother making no effort to maintain his body in good condition. 3 approaches to the projectile, and nothing else. Lee Hain seriously thought that his brother wanted the crown prince to fall apart, but Suyang was relentless. Brother can withstand heavy loads. Suyang promised Lee Hain that he should only do the squat 8 times, but then he started adding more times. And so it happened. In addition, this scoundrel shouted that the crown prince was placing his knees incorrectly, but his waist moved forward again and things won't work that way. Lee Hain begged his brother to become the kind person he used to be again, and not this evil monster. Suyang ominously replied that for the sake of the health of the whole family, he could become an evil spirit. The main thing is that it would be beneficial. After all, now Lee Hain also follows the teachings of improving the body. The crown prince did not expect to be so cleverly drawn into this madness. For 15 minutes, King Sejong the Great had been running on the wheel. Suyang thought that at the beginning of training, His Majesty was on the verge of losing his breath. But he had already been running without stopping for a long time. The same applied to the crown prince, who did the bench press 12 times for the first time. The physical abilities of this family are unique. Chan Yong-seol's contribution to this was enormous. Considering the realities of this era, such a treadmill is already something. The scientist asked to tell him more about the path to recovery in order to find ways to improve the device. The best scientist of Joseon, famous for centuries, was also a workaholic. The courtiers discussed among themselves the king's new way of life. He is so tired because of these activities that government affairs have faded into the background. The big concern was that the king had lost weight. The doctor told the crown prince that diabetes was progressing and the king's body was exhausted. Lee Hain objected. He also lost weight after starting classes, but the courtiers did not listen to the arguments of reason. They demanded that the king stop these activities that threatened his health. The loud voice of the king asked what was happening in his palace. The courtiers turned and were dumbfounded in surprise. Who is it that came? A tall, slender, handsome man in royal clothes came out to them. He was accompanied by Prince Suyang. The king repeated the question, "What is happening?" All the courtiers quickly left the court, bowing to His Majesty. Lee Hain told his brother that the ministers had spread rumors that changes in his father's appearance were a sign of a progressive illness. Suyang believed that these were unfounded rumors. Father sweats a lot but drinks less. The thirst is gone. The doctor was worried that the disease might worsen, but the prince was determined to work with his father for all 6 months, and only 3 had passed. Time flew by. Winter has come and the first snow has fallen. Suyang's entire past life seemed like a dream. The prince came to the palace as usual and met Captain Chi Suk, who was waiting for him in the courtyard. He noticed that the prince came to the king very early. Suyang replied that the captain also arrived at the crack of dawn. Lee Suk replied that His Royal Majesty complained of fatigue and could not attend to state affairs. So he came to ease his burden. Suyang thanked the captain for being so worried about the king. He and the inspector came together in the desire to preserve the strength of spirit and body of His Majesty. By the way, isn't the inspector himself going to take the path of body improvement? Lee Suk could not be distracted by caring about his own health. The state treasury provides him. Can he give preference to his own well-being? Suyang was not aware of the duties of the chief inspector, but 1 hour a day can be devoted to his health. Lee Suk angrily rejected this proposal. Even in 1 hour, everything can go downhill. He walked away, finally telling the prince that the promised 6 months would soon end. The inspectorate division investigates misconduct by officials and holds them accountable. Charges can only be brought based on hearsay, and it is considered normal if statements have no basis. They are needed to follow basic principles and keep officials at bay. Lee Suk was informed that the royal hunt would begin tomorrow. He remembered how, at the head of all his employees, he begged the king on his knees to stop the grueling training. No, nothing is more important than government affairs, but a healthy lifestyle can wait. The king must remain righteous and set an example for his officials. Paying attention to all sorts of insignificant details contradicts this principle. Lee Suk went into a rage and yelled at the king. Lightning flashed in His Majesty's eyes. Looks like the chief inspector has a problem. He is so committed to his princes that Sejong does not even know whether this is loyalty or a challenge to his king. The king's real reason for training is to keep himself in shape and set an example for others on the royal hunt. One of the inspectors shouted that this was a huge risk. The royal hunt was established by King Tae-jo. For an inexperienced rider, this can be very dangerous. Sejong ordered veterans to be placed next to the military unit to prevent accidents, and the king himself is going to continue training to become an example for everyone. In the meantime, it would be nice for the chief inspector himself to take care of his health. The inspector was warped by such advice, but he said out loud that the king's mercy was limitless. On the day of the hunt, many people gathered in the city of Cheorwan, in the province of Gyeondo. King Sejong the Great was going to personally lead the hunt. He stood confidently in the saddle and rode next to the prince. All soldiers must act according to custom. Everyone moves as one. The courtiers said in amazement that it was the first time in 10 years that they had seen the king like this. Even on the last royal hunt, he rode in a palanquin and kept his head down. The royal hunt was declared open, and the king set his horse into a gallop. It was nice to ride like that. No one thought that the great Sejong would ride a horse so dashingly. But this was not enough. The king was surprised to realize that he could see prey that was far away. Seeing a wild boar in the bushes, he shouted to his son to give him a bow and arrows.